Ryan, Apple TV Plus continues to just churn out quality content.
Yeah.
Limited series.
It's funny because it almost feels like I want something to be terrible just so I can say, well, okay, this was terrible.
Right.
There's been, I guess, because the quality of Apple TV Plus has been really quite high.
Overall.
Yeah.
I don't think they've had any dogs.
Well, I mean, we could argue what Cherry, as far as is it a good film to see, but it's an important film. So that's that. Right. But that anyway, I guess the moral of the story for this would be is if you're going to do a streaming service and you're going to only be able to have a limited number of films that you put on and series on that service, you might as well make them really good.
Right.
And that's kind of, does it have the selection of Netflix or Hulu or Disney Plus or blah, blah, blah? No. But you know what? It's a lot cheaper. And the movies that they do have in series, they are pretty good. And this one we're talking about is a 4-part documentary that kind of goes, I don't know if it was supposed to be as timely as it is. But there is a lot of discussion about how do we teach the past and talk about some of the difficult times in our political history. And there are a lot of stories. This delves into Lincoln. And while there's some conjecture here and there, most of this is pretty much, well, this is what happened.
It really is. I mean, so it's 4 episodes. It's called Lincoln's Dilemma, and the first episode really kind of deals with his background, but then we get into him being elected and the Civil War and then post-Civil War America. So it's 4 episodes, about 4 hours long, all told. And the great thing is that I think the information in this series isn't necessarily new, but I think it's put together, I think, in a lot more comprehensive manner and in kind of I want to say more chronological, but history is almost always portrayed chronologically.
Yeah, well, I think it gives a better context to a lot of things. And for me, I think the strongest aspect of this film is a lot of times people want to present Abraham Lincoln as being definitively this or that. Well, we as people, and I think, we all kind of know this, we evolve as situations evolve. And Lincoln, as presented in this film, is a complex person whose ideas that he had at one point in his life evolve into different ideas and an understanding of what needs to happen. And, this is not a film about a man who wakes up in the morning and say, okay, I'm going to be president and I'm going to do X, 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 and X. Well, this is, he ends up being president and goes, okay, now my goal, really all he wanted to do is unify the country. And it was him trying to come to the understanding of how that was possible and what that meant. That
the whole lead up, to the Civil War. And then remember, he's elected and then the Civil War starts. He's elected specifically because of his life experiences up to that point. So he gets to Washington with the understanding that the nation is at a turning point with regards to slavery.
Yeah, but he doesn't know, but he's not necessarily, he doesn't know what to do with that. Well, exactly.
Right. It's not like now where you get instant reports from everywhere and, he's dealing with, this is 1860. Yeah. Where your news is a week old if you're lucky. And that's in good times. But he comes in and he goes, okay, he gets elected. America needs to figure this out. And that's really, and that's like the depth of his goal coming in. He's like, we need to figure out the slavery situation. And before anything can happen, there's secession and shots fired.
Yeah.
And so immediately now it's not like, well, now it's too late to figure it out in the manner that he was kind of expecting to. Now it becomes a matter of, can we put the country back together and figure this out? And those are the steps, and that's kind of the order he takes. And it's very, like, you're right. Contextually, this gives us a broader look at the actions he took, and that's important because an action in a vacuum is almost meaningless. You have to see, when it was taken, what else was happening, what happened right before, what happened as a result, and that, I think, is where this series really does shine, because it'll say and then he's going to do this, and here's what was going on that led him up to that. So they'll even backtrack a couple steps and bring you up to speed, and then they'll they bring stuff in, and there's a lot of verbatim letters and speeches that we talk about and in this. And I minored in American history. It was mostly 20th century history for my undergrad work, but politics is a messy business.
Yeah. Yes.
And anyone that complains about this party or that party or whatever, and doesn't, mainstream political people don't look left, don't look right. Hard lefts and hard rights, because everyone can start picking those people apart. But if you're looking at the middle people and you're finding one thing that they didn't do, but they got this other thing done, but they had to not do or do this other thing, that's politics. And people are, political purity. Purity is the word. Ideological purity is huge. Everyone seems to want ideological purity out of their politicians. Well, no one is pure. No one is, and by pure, I don't mean without fault. I mean in complete agreement with with a set of ideals. That's what I mean by purity. But yeah, so you're right. It is timely. It released Friday, just in time for President's Day weekend. But it's also timely as a reflection of the divisiveness of the late 1850s and early 1860s, both politically and socially, and the divide now in America.
Mm-hmm.
I do like that they focused on Lincoln and the Civil War. I do like that they did not sit here and go, this A from 1860 is this A from 2010 or 2015 or 2001. And I think that, because that would have made this a political series in a way that it doesn't need to be. It flirts with it a couple times.
Yeah, but I think that's just, sure, but it references almost, but to me, there's a moment where they have some protesters out in front of Lincoln's monument who are upset that Lincoln has a monument.
Right.
And there's an aspect of what they're saying that's true, with their arguments of, the way that history tells the story. It certainly gives Abraham Lincoln a lot of credit for things that he didn't really do on his own.
Right.
Or didn't do completely on his own, or shouldn't probably get all the credit for. And I think, yes, that absolutely needs to be addressed. And I think that this film does a really good job of addressing some of those things. But it isn't, that's just like a little quick clip.
Yeah.
And the film doesn't really, it's not trying to tarnish Lincoln's image. It's not attempting to over glorify Lincoln. It presents a very complicated situation. You know, and the man who was put into that complicated situation. It examines how some of his decision making may have changed. You know, the thing about history is we always want to talk about, well, you know, what was the motivation, or what did they consider not doing, or what I would say, well, we don't really know because we only know what they did.
Yeah.
And so let's judge Lincoln on what he did. And you know, I mean, you know, there's conversations and things and that he had that you can kind of work into the narrative, but ultimately we can only judge him not by some of the ideas he had, but by how he ultimately went about and did things.
Right. And what I mean, because, you know, the more, I mean, you know, they do talk about how every president, or, you know, in every period, people liked, anytime there's a perceived, you know, national kind of identity crisis, I guess people look to Lincoln, and they're very quick to drag Lincoln into it. I can think of two that I would use to compare. One is more direct in terms of civil rights and African Americans, and that's Lyndon Johnson, who was a racist, a bigot, probably an alcoholic, you know, a dog abuser, and yet
what did he oversee?
Right. You know what I mean? So
it's hard.
It is. Yeah. And the other one, and people were going to see, it's like, well, you make a good point. And now they're going to pillory me. The other one is George W. Bush, who came into office wanting to be one thing and immediately was forced to be something else. And that was a wartime president.
Well, and and that's I mean, yes, that there's a conversation that can be had about that. But no, you know, Lincoln did not go into the presidency expecting to have to make a lot of the decisions that he made.
No,
you know, he
thought he was going to come in and legislate through this issue of slavery.
Yeah, but you know, and they make it perfectly clear that it's not like he walked in and said, we're getting rid of slavery. That wasn't what he said. And and I think that's where people get, you know, a little hung up about Lincoln, or some of the other, where they say, well, you know,
why didn't he?
Why didn't he? Well,
because he couldn't.
Well, that, and I think because sometimes we have to learn. And we have to listen to other people, and we have to listen to opinions. We have to, you know, I'm sure, you know, he wanted to unify the states, and he desperately wanted to do that. And that was his priority. It's in the process of trying to do that he discovers the only way that he thinks that actually can happen.
Right.
And he ultimately ends up taking that path, which is not a very popular path.
No.
And it's another one of those, I mean, history is full of stories about how close things came from going off the rails and going in a completely different direction. Civil War is another one of those things in history. They easily, like World War II, some people make some different decisions. The world
not
is
even
entirely
that many.
Different.
Like one or two.
Yes. You know, one or two things changes the whole course of history. And we don't like to think about that necessarily, but it's true. You know, one or two bad decisions made by one side can seal the fate of an entire, you know,
because these are great conversations. You know, you get together and drink and talk, you know, political philosophy, but, you know, stop and think about it. Lincoln gets elected and comes in, and the South says, we're out. What if he just says, like the previous president said, which is one of my favorites, you know, when asked, you know, these Southern states were talking about seceding if you try to outlaw slavery. And the president said, if they want to leave, who am I to stop them? And Lincoln basically comes in and is asked the same question. It says, they can't leave. I won't let them.
Yeah.
And it's so, if he comes in and he goes, well, if they want to leave, they're independent states, they can leave. What if that had just been the way it was and they left and the United States went ahead and abolished slavery and the Confederate states in the South had become their own nation peacefully. There was, no civil war, but had kept, easily that could have been the decision that was made. But that was not the decision he made. And that led to a whole raft of other decisions along the way that you're right. And he had, because in life, in anybody's life, you deal with the situation that is in front of you and you hope that you do it well enough to get to this result that is 35 decisions down the road. Well, he had one decision to make with like 38,000 permutations that he had to try to look ahead at and then bargain for and then backtrack or not do. The fact that that the United States didn't lose when they probably should have militarily on several occasions is the fact that they didn't just let the South leave. So yeah, you can, Monday morning quarterback the decisions he made, but you have to, again, contextually, you have to look at where he was and what he was dealing with. He was a president with a Congress and citizenry that was mixed. It wasn't like everyone north of the Mason-Dixon line thought that slavery should be abolished, either under the compromise or in total or whatever. There was no unity of thought.
Well, and I think that's one of the places that the film also maybe teaches us some things that we didn't know, about, because in school, and obviously we know it's more complicated than this, but it's the North versus the South. It's racism versus not racism, but it's so much more complicated than that. It's not the Civil War was ultimately about slavery.
Yes.
But slavery is a much more complicated issue than I think that we often allow it to be, if that makes sense. It's, again, you're right. It's not, if you're Northern, you were this, and if you're Southern, you were this. And when we think of freedom, do we mean freedom or do we mean equality, or do we mean, there's a lot of different
is it equality
levels
of opportunity or equality of outcome? Is it this or is it that? So it's not like the United States in 1860 was balkanized into the North and the South. There was mix. Now I would argue that, and this series kind of makes that, again, where they kind of flirt with it. I would argue that the United States today is actually more balkanized geographically now than it was in 1860. Because there are diehard blues and diehard reds states. But then if you look in states, you can see, bastions of blue, like diehard blue regions in red states and diehard red regions in blue states. So the fact that America has developed and has kind of, it's a weird construct how we've kind of ideologically segregated ourselves. Whereas in that time period, it was a much more amorphous kind of mix. Farmers and merchants and this is and that's and the others, everyone was much closer and much more interactive. There wasn't a lot of opportunity for separation. And I feel like now it's easier to just go away from people you disagree with, both physically and socially. Online, you can isolate yourself. You can move someplace that's more in line with your quote unquote values or politics or what, insert characteristic here. And it's easier to do now. And I think that kind of exacerbates the issues that this series touches on, or really does kind of manhandle as it relates to the Civil War. And like I said, it flirts with now, but it never commits all the way. And like I said, I think that's good in terms of talking about Lincoln.
But I think also part of it is they don't have to come out and say, oh, and by the way, we're going through something similar to this.
Right.
They don't have to do that. If you're watching it, you're going to come to your own. I mean, it's obvious that.
But there are a lot of movies and TV shows that love to hammer that and their respective points of view about that. And I was happy that they didn't in this, because it's if this is about Lincoln, it keeps it about Lincoln.
Yeah.
But if you're making your argument well enough, anyone can see parallels or, associations or whatever with modern America. The only downside, and I'm going to say there is a downside, is that as a result of this kind of the situation we find ourselves, that they say is very similar to 1860, people can see what they want to see in those parallels, which doesn't necessarily help the situation.
No, because you can take away from it what you want to take away from.
Right.
History is so messy.
Oh yeah.
And I think
God, yes.
we're having, and that's part of the problem that we're running into in America, I think right now, is that history is not as clean and as perfect as we'd like it to be. And this works for both sides. And to, I guess, what we there are things that Lincoln did that are dangerous. There are things that he did that I disagree with. And his interaction with the general media is a little terrifying, the way that he handled certain things. So it's while I want to glorify a lot of what he did, there's also things that he did that are scary.
Well, yes, but you can also see parallels to that now.
Well, and exactly
about media.
Yes.
And the government, not just president, but the government's interaction with media, again, on both sides.
Well,
so
and
it's just,
and so, but and I guess part of the thing too is I have no idea what the media was like then. When I think media, I think of what I work in contemporary.
Right.
And which is radically different than what most people think it actually is, which is hilarious. No, it's not. It's actually really scary.
But no, back then it was all newspapers.
Well, it was, and I can't guarantee you that they were all, that they weren't skewing the narrative. I wasn't there. I don't know what that was like. I don't know the editorial control that existed at that point. I don't know what kind of checks and balances existed at that point. So that's probably another documentary entirely that I would be interested in knowing, because there were things I learned about Lincoln in this film that I found a little troubling. Yeah. But you know what? I don't think, the more we learn about people, everyone has good ideas and bad ideas, and the best intentions or the worst intentions, or, it's never as, again, like I said, it's messy.
Because we're people.
And gosh, I don't know, man. It's
for the longest time when I would talk politics with people, I would always be like, the problem the problem is that Democrats and Republicans basically agree on where we want to be. We just always disagree on how to get there. But anymore, I don't know that we agree on where we want to be.
Or, I don't even know that we fundamentally agree what America is and what the America is supposed to be. We talk about the founding fathers and whatnot, and about their vision of America. And they had no idea what life was going to be like 200 years in the future. They had no idea what, they were doing the best that they could with the world that they were living in. I don't think you can really argue that the world is the same as it was then.
No.
And so, I mean, we're obviously the foundation, and we know that, but we act as if they were also, prophets and visionaries who knew how everything was to play out and knew every situation, and everything in the Constitution is applicable now as it was then, and whatnot. There's a lot of stuff that we got to look at, and maybe as a country we need to decide: are we a country that's built on immigrants, which is, I think, what a lot of us kind of thought the country was, open arms, Statue of Liberty, or are we something else? And then there's these sort of questions, I think, that are in the film. It's in Lincoln's, I think, trying to figure out what America is and what it needs to be, and some people are happy to go along for the ride, and a lot of people aren't.
Yeah.
It's
not easy. It is definitely not in an impossible situation. He could only do what was possible, whether it was right or wrong or delayed or skewed, or again, yes, you, in a way, I'll disagree with you. I think we should deify the founding fathers in that they knew what society should be, but they also knew the limitations of what they had. And I think that was nice. Lincoln is kind of the same way. Yeah, deify him, because he always knew what was right. I just don't think that he ever thought he was going to be in a position to actually get it there. And then once he did, he had to figure out how to do that within the constraints of the system in which he found himself. It's and again, it's a lot of, well, why don't they just do this? Like, well, it's against the law. He did a lot of stuff that's against the law. You're correct. Just a crap ton that is just morally wrong and legally wrong. He did a lot of it. And that's stuff that you need to look at and go, well, we need to prevent that kind of stuff from that. But again, it's like, but then by doing that, he got to the greater good. So in an instance of a greater good, does an end justify the means? Well, not if we're the country we think we are.
Well, and so I mean,
it's like,
it's when all men are created equal or whatnot. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Does that literally? Does that were they thinking? What was their how were they defining that, and how do we define that?
Right.
And because there were a lot of those men who were slave owners, who may or may not have viewed, blacks as being part of that conversation.
Yep.
I don't know. I mean, it's just so complex, and you can, and I don't think we should necessarily, not be proud of what they did. But we also have to look into the context of they weren't perfect people.
No.
And Lincoln wasn't a perfect person who always made the right decisions. History. I mean, I'm sure there are people who think that Lincoln is, the worst thing to ever happen to America. That he's, a shame. That. But
is he ashamed because he ended slavery? Is he ashamed because he suspended the writ of habeas corpus? Is he ashamed because he went after the media? Which is it? Because it can't be all of them.
No.
And that's what I hate. I dislike the absolutism. And again, we get back to this idea of ideological purity.
Yeah.
And it's
and
it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So it's,
and I think the problem is we try to suggest that it does.
Right. And so you admit that it doesn't.
It's problematic. And I think that's, that is, there's a lot of discussion of what should and shouldn't be taught in schools. Well, to be honest with you, there's a lot of stuff in this documentary that I never learned in school that I wish I had. There are things in this documentary that, that I guess make it easier to connect to the humanity of what was going on. As much as yes, celebrate Lincoln for what he did, but also realize that he was just a guy.
Yeah.
An extraordinary guy, but he literally was just a guy, whose only agenda, as best we can tell, was to keep the country he loved from falling apart. And that path took him to a place that he probably didn't expect to be, that some people, I can't imagine him wanting to be in a position where he's hated.
Yeah, no, who would?
And when I say he's hated, he wasn't just the South and the North at various points were not very happy with him.
Yeah.
We again, another little thing in history, his reelection was not a certainty. In fact,
no.
A lot of times it's the other way around. It was more likely that he would not. So I don't know. I mean, we need to teach history as this complicated, evolving thing. And it's going to make you maybe respect people in different ways, and maybe no one made all the right decisions.
No.
And we need to understand that. And no one's going to make all the right decisions. The person Lincoln was in his 30s is radically different than who he was later on in life, after experience and things that change him.
Yep.
So it's really hard to judge people based on who they were 20 years ago, or maybe even 10 years ago. We need to start seeing people as they are now, and what they're, and hold them accountable for who they are now. Obviously, there's certain things that supersede that. If you were, a Nazi conspiracist, and that was you're
right.
And you were responsible for the deaths of thousands of people, well, that's different. But there are people,
but a 10-year-old tweet,
that,
or a stand-up routine from your 20s
in a different, yes, exactly. That gets a little problematic.
Yeah.
Now, if what they said is what they believe, and they still believe that, there are consequences.
Well, then you judge them on that.
Yes, but we have to allow people. You can, at one point in your life, be racist, and you can grow up and realize that that's wrong. And we have to allow for that, because otherwise, why will people change and grow?
Exactly.
It's hard.
Well,
and this movie hits on aspects of that, and how complicated, and how sometimes our biggest, the people who are most critical of us, that seem to be our enemy, are actually the people that matter, that ultimately end up being the biggest influence on us.
Yep.
Because they force you to consider the opposite view, and then in considering that, I think maybe we grow. I don't know, but I'm just trying to grow
in the absence of light and water.
Yeah.
So no, you're right. The Lincoln's exposure to Frederick Douglass, the experiences of escaped slaves turning around to fight for the Union, leading to all black regiments from the North, and how they fought and all that, and in equal pay for black soldiers. And you see all of these steps. And it's because again, people are complicated, and people don't like to change.
Well, and they got, to a certain degree, they got a lot of things half right throughout the journey.
Yeah.
And half right
is still better than all wrong.
Yeah. There's a, should the pay have been equal? Yes. We're still dealing with that today. It's no secret that people are paid differently based on their sex and their ancestry. It's an unfortunate fact that we are still trying to overcome today. And so, of course, it was an issue then. But we need to acknowledge that it was an issue then, and that it continues to be an issue that doesn't really make a lot of sense. Because if you do the job as well as someone else, shouldn't you be paid the same? And I think most people will be like, yes, but, and we need to figure out what that but is.
Well,
and figure out how to work that out.
I'm not an entrepreneur. And the best answer I've only ever been able to come up with in my head is like, as someone will pay someone what they think they can get away with paying them to get the job done. You know what I mean? Because in the end, isn't it about making money? Now, some employers may seem more altruistic and do other things and, hire or whatever. But in the end, that disparity comes down to, well, I'm going to pay what I think, what I need to pay. Because no one wants to, you don't want to pay $5 a gallon for gas.
No.
So if you can find a way to pay $3 a gallon for gas, not that I'm real happy about that right now, you're going to pay $3 and work is, it's a shitty thing.
Yeah.
But it's a thing. Again, people are complicated creatures.
And I'm saying, and I hope I haven't said anything that offends anyone, because a lot of this is not really thought through as much as maybe I would like it to be as we're talking.
I'm sure we'll get calls.
Because I still think Lincoln did some wonderful things. I don't want to say that because there was a part of Lincoln that I have issues with, that suddenly takes over, or changes what he did. I don't think anyone could take that out of this conversation, that either of us is either tearing. We keep coming back to he's a guy trying to deal. He's one self-educated guy trying to deal with the fallout of 54 guys' plan that came up with the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, who had lots of time to figure it out. And now he's trying to put a country back together that's at war. One guy. I cut the guy some slack. Well, and I think that to expect any of those leaders to be absolutely perfect, we shouldn't. We need to recognize the humanity in them. Otherwise, we can't connect and just continue with what they set out to do. Now, again, there might be an argument about what was their intention and where, and that is something I think as Americans we need to figure out. And I don't know that we can, but I would love to, can we figure out what is the America we are striving for?
Yeah. And I think, because again, we try not to do too much politics, but that's really what all this is about. If nothing else, America needs to realize that it doesn't matter what the founding fathers were thinking, but they gave us the framework to help us figure out what we want to do. And so once we figure out what we want to do, we already have the framework to do it.
Yeah. And
if nothing else, let's at least acknowledge that.
Well, and I think
you can't throw out there, because if you can't throw out all their ideas, or you throw out the good ones.
Well, and that's the thing, and you can't, if we're going to stick to, okay, this is what they said. Well, you can't ignore then all men are created equal. You can't.
No,
that's one hell of a statement. And they chose their words very carefully. So if we're going to take all these other things so literally when it comes to gun rights and things like that, we also need to address the fact that was part
let's
of it.
stop and remember, in the Declaration, they argued about whether it was unalienable rights or inalienable rights. That's how much language mattered. You know what I mean? Was it un or in? And they argued about that. So yeah, you have to look at all of the words. Yes. Can you contextually say that did they mean land owning white men when they said all men are created equal? Probably, but
to a certain degree.
To a certain degree. But that's but again, that's a statement of principle. That's not even in the Constitution. Everyone needs to remember that. That's in the Declaration of Independence. So, but that's a declaration of principle. So if in principle, all men means every human being born on the planet, that principle still applies. And so don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak.
Anyway, it's not easy.
No.
And this documentary explores that in a way that I think is important.
It is. I thought it was really exceptional, because I just thought that the way they put it together, and they did provide so much context and so many viewpoints, and they didn't. And I don't think anyone came in, and any of the various historians and whatnot that they had, nobody came in and even tried to say Lincoln was X. Everyone was like, Lincoln was X but, or, everyone acknowledged the nuance of his background and what he walked into and the situation. And everyone acknowledged the nuance. And that's what people need. I think that's the biggest thing in this, is if you watch it, you're going to see all of these people that do this for a living discussing nuance. Now they can discuss what they agree and disagree with, but they do it in terms of acknowledging the fact that, there weren't any real good answers for Lincoln at any turn. But they're like, but he did this and he did that. And some people wanted this, but it's a complicated thing. It was a complicated thing. And, I love that they were pretty balanced. And like I said, they did provide so much external context for, it wasn't just this diary or journal entry that he wrote and then this speech he gave, and were there differences or similarities? It was, well, this is what these people were saying. This is what the Congress was doing. This is what was happening on the battlefield. And then this is what he said. All of that works together. Yeah. And I think that is the hugest thing to get out of this is you get to see the big picture of what he was doing, because it was everything he did was a dilemma. Do I fire this general and hire another one? Do I let this general stay? Do I do this? Do I do that? And everything is being weighed in the context of these huger issues, because there were no small decisions. Or, they were small decisions that could have huge impacts. And they all did, for good or ill. They all did have huge impacts for the most part. So, I watched it. I literally watched all 4 episodes straight.
Me too.
I was like, I was sitting here at my desk. Well, let me see how the first one was. And I watched the first one, and I watched the second one, and I watched the third one, and I was like, well, I'm done. So I was like, well, I hadn't intended to just binge all 4 episodes. Yeah. But I couldn't stop. It was that compellingly put together. And again, I applaud Apple TV Plus, and I know we always do. No, we are not sponsored by Apple TV Plus, even though it sounds like we are. We are not. I would welcome their sponsorship, but no, they're really putting some thought into what they're putting on their service, and Lincoln's Dilemma is no exception. Yeah. So, there you go. That's your history. That's your history podcast for the year. Probably won't do another one of those. And we didn't even touch on all of the military stuff that he.
No, there's a ton of that too.
So good. Again, and that appeals to me. But yeah, it's if you're going to win the war. That's what that boiled down to. But again, a lot of things went down there too. Yeah. So Lincoln's Dilemma, 4-episode limited series on Apple TV Plus. It is playing now. Again, we say it every time. If you can get your free week of Apple TV Plus or something, there's enough stuff for you to fill an entire weekend and several evenings during a free viewing for you to understand why we talk about them so positively. There's just good stuff, such good stuff. But on that note, we're going to leave Lincoln's Dilemma because they did 3 hours and 41 minutes total. They could still be talking.
Yeah, it's really good stuff.
It's really good stuff.
Yeah,
so good. We will be back with more, hopefully really good stuff soon. I know we have the Batman coming out in another week. We have Cyrano coming out next weekend, which we have already seen back in December. So if you want to go listen to that episode, that would be awesome. And you can find out why you should go see Cyrano. But until we talk to you again, stay safe, be good. Don't forget to like us, follow us on social media, all that stuff. We would appreciate it. And if you have any ideas, I know Ryan and I both like really kind of offbeat movies to change the tone of this a little bit. If there's a movie, maybe an older movie, maybe a little left to center film that you think we might have fun talking about, we welcome suggestions because some of those movies are some of the best ones to talk about. So we welcome those suggestions. But until we talk to everyone again, I am Mark. That is Ryan. Bye, Ryan.
See you guys.
And we'll talk to y'all later.